Very pleased that you joined the webinar, and I'd now like to introduce Julie Fernandez. She is the lead trainer at Exhale to Inhale and is the primary trauma therapist with the Hope Integrative Psychiatry team, where she helps clients feel safe in their bodies, comfortable in the world, and embodied, integrated, and whole. Julie has experience working with low-risk teenage girls, disadvantaged youth in inner city schools, at eating disorder centers, as well as domestic violence centers and rape crisis centers. Julie, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate that. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for joining me. Very excited for this conversation. I'll continue to share a little bit more about me, and I'll share about Exhale to Inhale, and then I'll get right into the meaty stuff, the nice, good stuff. So I am a trauma-informed yoga teacher as well as a somatic trauma therapist based out of Los Angeles, California. And my desire for this work really stemmed from my own personal experiences with childhood sexual abuse, as well as trauma throughout my childhood and adolescence, which later led to really abusive relationships later on in life. And I went through the many cycles of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and complete dissociation, disconnection from my body. And by listening to and befriending my body, I was able to transform through these experiences. And so I take what I have learned throughout the years, and I work closely with my clients as they begin their healing journey. And I really help survivors feel strong in their bodies, reclaim their agency, and further empower them with strength-based and self-defense techniques, which we'll talk about why that's important when we understand how trauma heals. And so I am the lead trainer and a trauma-informed yoga teacher with Exhale to Inhale, and we're a nonprofit where we empower survivors through the healing practice of yoga. And we work in domestic violence shelters, community centers, and FJCs and the Ys and other nonprofits that help serve domestic violence agencies. And so we work mostly throughout the New York City area and have expanded online since March of 2020. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that work looks like. But for today, we will talk about what it means to be trauma-informed, why that is helpful, how we can really make an impact, not only in our lives, but in others' lives by being trauma-informed. We'll discuss vicarious trauma and self-care. We'll talk about what trauma actually is and how it heals, as well as we'll discuss trauma-informed principles and how we can apply it in our day-to-day. And then we'll wrap it all up and talk about why yoga works and how yoga works. So first, I like to start with this quote by Molly Boder Harris, which reads, "Being trauma-informed is a way for us to truly see people. It helps us compassionately and empathetically hold a safe container. It allows every interaction to be an empowering reminder people are the experts of their own experience." And talk about self-empowerment. This is about giving people their power back. And being trauma-informed is what I also like to call being people-informed. When we can understand ourselves in our human experience, understand our bodies and our response to the complex human experiences, we can better understand others and their response and their reactions to the complex human experience. So we can have a little bit more compassion for ourselves as well as for others, and therefore we can connect on a much deeper level with one another. Being trauma-informed is about realizing the prevalence of trauma and recognizing how trauma affects us, And then once we understand that, we can better create an environment that fosters the healing of trauma. So essentially, once we're trauma informed, we are less likely to cause more harm to others, and we can help heal ourselves and one another. So being trauma informed is about empowering ourselves and empowering others. I think it's important to understand like the prevalence. So I like to start off with this statistic from the National Council of Behavioral Health, which states that 70%, approximately 70% of adults in the United States have experienced a trauma at least once in their lifetime. And out of those 70%, at least 20% have gone on to develop PTSD. And so these numbers are really high. So 70% claim to have experienced a trauma at least once in their lifetime. Only 20% go on to experience PTSD. The reason why I think it's important to understand that is because it's very likely that we are going to have someone who's experienced trauma, a survivor of trauma, in our classroom. We interact with them in our day-to-day. So it's just very likely that we will have interactions with a survivor. And so it's just better to understand what that means. So we'll unpack that a little bit more as we go on throughout our discussion today. So vicarious trauma is something important that we should be talking about because it's what we're all experiencing collectively right now. So according to the Joyful Heart Foundation, vicarious trauma happens when we accumulate and carry the stories of trauma, which include images, sounds, resonant details, whatever we've heard, which then comes to inform our worldview. So what's important to understand is that our nervous system doesn't really know the difference between that thing is happening to you versus it is happening to me. We are going to respond the same way. When there's a threat, whether it's something that's going to affect us directly or we hear of it, our nervous system prepares and organizes the same way. And we'll understand what that means a little bit more when I discuss how trauma shows up and how it heals. But the thing to note from this is that we are impacted by what happens around us because we are loving, caring beings. So especially when it's the loved one or people that we help, we are affected whether we recognize it or not. I heard something a long time ago that I wish I could remember, and I say this a lot, so I probably should figure that out. But I heard, and I read somewhere, people who have experienced a trauma are called survivors. And people who witness or hold space are called co-survivors. And we need just as much support. And so we want to think of it just as seriously and take it just as seriously as though it were trauma that was happening directly to us. Some of the common signs and symptoms for vicarious trauma are very similar to those we see with other traumas: anxiety, nervousness, mood swings, anger, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, depression, and other signs of PTSD. And so although healers and those in helping professions are exposed to suffering more often, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is at risk for vicarious trauma, but it is something to consider. So healers greatly benefit from creating proactive strategies, and that's where we go to self-care. So our next slide shows actually the 5 domains of self-care that I often talk about. So self-care is anything that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. And we can also include these other domains here, or spiritual and personal or social selves here. And while self-care may seem simple, it is often overlooked, and it is the key to a good relationship with ourselves and others. So having a really great self-care practice is what is going to help us from being greatly impacted from the vicarious trauma, trauma that's happening around us that we are witness to, and also our own personal traumas. So I like to break it down in these 5 domains to make sure that we understand what self-care actually is. So it is not enough to practice self-care by going to get that massage once a month or every 3 months, but rather it's something that we should be doing every single day, and it doesn't have to be big. So self-care really can be about making sure that we get adequate sleep, that we eat regularly and nourishing foods, we're exercising our bodies, we're hydrating, we're talking to ourselves in a positive way, we do some kind of self-reflection, we cuddle our pets, spend time with our family, practice self-love, go out in nature, whether there's a religious practice that you have, or meditation, prayer, chanting, and this is probably like the most important, or I guess maybe for me, it's the most important because it's been the hardest. So practicing personal and social self-care is about creating boundaries and really understanding what that means, like your personal boundaries, having hobbies, and really creating a work-life balance. So really, really important to take these into consideration and start to understand what you can do for yourself to be really proactive, especially if you're working with people who have experienced a trauma, or even just being a part of this world today as we see everything that's going on around us. So self-care is so important. That's why I start with that, because we should be practicing it all the time. And it can look like anything. So we can talk about that much later. So moving on, let's talk about what trauma actually is. So trauma is when our capacity to cope has been overwhelmed. So when there is a threat, whether it's real or perceived, our nervous system organizes in a way to help us get to safety. So we go into what we call our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight survival mode. There's also our parasympathetic nervous system. Once we've come back to safety, we go back into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest. And we're designed to fluctuate through these throughout the day, where we rise to meet a challenge using our sympathetic nervous system. And then once that challenge has been met, we return back to homeostasis, back to our parasympathetic state, our rest and digest. So the problem is, or the problem occurs when we actually stay in one longer than the other. And I really like to use this graphic. This is called the window of tolerance model, which was designed by Dr. Dan Siegel to help us really understand how trauma manifests. And it can give us a better visual on what we need to do to come back out of it. So if we see this model here in the middle, the green, we have that line, and that is the normal range, the normal fluctuations of our nervous system. We go into sympathetic to meet a challenge, and then we come back down into parasympathetic. And this is what we're doing daily. So let's imagine, we all are familiar with this. We have sensations in our belly, and that is our message. It is time to eat. So our nervous system organizes in a way, we activate our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight, because we need to eat. And our nervous system is it's very dramatic, if you will. It's very black or white because it only knows life or death. So in that moment, we get the sensation and our nervous system says, I need to eat or I'm going to die. And so it goes into sympathetic fight or flight. Once we eat, our nervous system senses that safety where we're going to survive, we'll make it through. And then it goes back to parasympathetic and it calms us down, right? And so this is happening throughout our day, whether it's that email we didn't expect to get, we're stuck in traffic or whatever it is, we rise to meet a challenge. And again, as I said, the problem occurs, so that is not the problem, we're designed for that, but the problem occurs when we stay in this state. So what we are needing to do is to come back out of a sympathetic state, coming into our parasympathetic after each stressful experience. Because another way that I like to talk about trauma is so trauma is not necessarily about the thing that happened to us, but it's about the thing it's about how we hold on to what happened to us. And so we want to make sure that we are discharging any of that excess energy that was accumulated when we activated to go into fight or flight. So when we go into fight or flight, and let's say that we got extremely overwhelmed and now it feels uncontrollable. We're in a state of anxiety, panic, or hypervigilance, and we stay stuck in that. We start to experience that in our bodies. And you might notice that as tension, you might notice a racing heart, trouble breathing, difficulty sleeping, and things like that. So it manifests in that way. And this is what we also call hyper arousal, when we stay stuck on. And we do that mostly because we are not getting the messages that the threat is gone. So we stay activated to continue to meet this challenge. So what we need to do in those moments is to get the signal, communicate to our nervous system, to our bodies, that the threat is not here any longer, which means we need to return back to the present moment. And so even if it is, let's say an email that we didn't expect to get, we have deadlines, we're just overwhelmed, there is no actual life threat here. And so we have to do what we can to come back down into our window of tolerance here. So if we see those two lines, the sympathetic, the red dotted line and the blue dotted line, we want to come back into that window, to come back into our normal range of the fluctuations between these two states. Something that also happens when we are overwhelmed, when our capacity has been overwhelmed, is we get into a hypo arousal state, or also what we call a stuck on off. And this is where we are low energy. We see a lot of depression, lethargy here, dissociation, which literally means not in my body. This is what we need to do. It's the same thing, where this is also a survival mechanism. This is what we also call our freeze state. Probably heard it as fight, flight, or freeze. And we freeze when the option to run or to fight back is not available to us. And there can be many reasons for it, but then we default to a freeze state. And that's actually where the trauma occurs, when this energy that was accumulated to complete the action of fighting or running away now gets stuck. It has nowhere to go. And that's what causes the harm in our bodies. And that's how we start to see these symptoms of trauma. And so back to this window of tolerance model, the idea here is that we want to stay within our window, and everyone has a different size window. So this window can be really narrow, or this window can be very wide, and it varies for people depending on experiences and just level of stress and trauma. But this window is very flexible, so we can always widen our window of tolerance. But the idea is that anything that happens within this window, we can handle, we can manage, we can stay pretty regulated and pretty present, able to meet that challenge. But if something happens outside of our window, we can go into either of these two states. We go into stuck on or stuck on off. And either way, whether we're stuck on or stuck on off, our intention is to come back into the middle. So if we are stuck on and we're experiencing anxiety or some kind of activated fiery energy, and we want to come back to the middle, we want to come back down. So here, practices that are grounding and calming and soothing can be really, really helpful. And this can be something super simple, like just connecting your body with the ground or the chair. Right? If you take a moment with me, we can just notice how your body is connected with the ground or the chair, whatever it is that you're sitting on, and feeling that support beneath you. And as you're here, maybe just noticing any sensations. There's nothing else to do here with this, but we're just noticing. And here, so once we do that, our intention is to come back to the present moment. In the present moment, I'm sitting in this chair and I'm feeling my feet on the floor. Just a really simple practice. If we're stuck on off, we are very low energy. And what we're wanting to do is to come back into our window. So we want to activate, we want to use this energy that's in our body. So introducing any movement here is helpful. And that can literally mean shaking the body. That can mean stretching, just really simple movements. So it doesn't have to be complex at all. And so that's our intention. We want to discharge some of this energy that stays stuck, that can lead to symptoms of trauma and PTSD. So now how do we put this together? So being trauma informed, we'll come back to that. So I love this quote by Bessel van der Kolk that says, being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. And so this comes back to why being trauma informed. When we can understand how trauma presents and what it needs to heal, we can start to create more of a safe environment and create that sense of safety for people. At Exhale to Inhale, our method is rooted in connection, safety, simplicity, and choice making. And that is, in our next slide, we'll see the principles that we apply in our Exhale to Inhale method. And connection is about how do we foster connection with people. And this is by saying people's names, looking them in the eye, in other ways that we can feel connected with one another. We need to feel a sense of belonging and love. And so anything that can really help us to feel more connected with one another is really important. Safety is about creating an environment that fosters a sense of safety. And that can literally mean so many different things depending on the population. So at Exhale to Inhale, when we're teaching yoga, we like to make sure that our clients, our students know what to expect, that they know where the exits are, that they can see it clearly, they know where the teacher will be at all times. If anyone is walking around the room, that needs to be stated. If there's noise or something going on outside of the room that needs to be addressed. Essentially, it's how can we help people feel safe in their environment, knowing what to expect there. That also bleeds into the principle of simplicity. We keep things really, really simple. And this is about saying what you mean, meaning what you say, making expectations very clear. Not only what you can expect from this session, but what is expected of you during the session. And simple things like that. Finally, the last principle is choice making. And trauma, if we think about it, is an experience of choice being taken away. And so when we are working with survivors, we want to give them choice back. And this comes back to empowering survivors to make choices for themselves. And this comes from the understanding that the practitioner, the student, knows best what is best for their body at any point. So those are the principles. And then how do we apply it? Trauma-informed yoga works. So at Exhale to Inhale, we measure 3 different areas before and after the yoga class. We measure stress, body aches, and sense of agency. And after class, students report having less stress, less body aches, and a greater sense of agency. And yoga is a practice where we connect our sense of self with like building connection with ourselves and our bodies. We cultivate the ability to remain present, to notice and tolerate inner experiences and discomforts. And through that, we learn to develop a new relationship with and in our bodies. And that is how we use the yoga practice for healing trauma. We'll unpack more of that, I'm sure, in just a moment. But that is all for this quick introduction. Exhale to Inhale. Since March of 2020, we have shifted our classes online. And so we have weekly classes for our staff and clients to practice 5 days a week over 12 weeks. And these are pre-recorded sessions in both Spanish and English. And they can do 30 minutes and 15-minute practices. And we also offer classes to the general practice. And these are live 30-minute classes on Tuesdays. So that is how you can practice trauma-informed yoga with Exhale to Inhale. And now I'd love to chat and answer some of the questions that might have come up.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that introduction to a trauma-informed yoga practice. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Martha Staeheli. I'm the director of the Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative in New England. And we are so lucky to have Julie with us and to be connected to the amazing work that Exhale to Inhale is doing for trauma survivors. And I have so many questions for you. And one of the reasons that we wanted to invite you to come to this session is because in the work we do around childhood trauma within schools and within community organizations, we talk a lot about building in mindfulness and yoga practices, but people are not necessarily sure what that looks like in practice. And, we have a wide range of experience of people within our audience, some of whom have done a lot of yoga, some of whom have never done it and never considered themselves to be somebody who might practice. But I wonder if you could just take a moment to talk a little bit about what the actual practice of trauma-informed yoga might look like compared with, say, the type of yoga class you would take at the gym.
Yeah, that's a great question. Trauma-informed yoga is really, it assumes that the practitioner is the best judge of how much activation they may need, or how much is too much. So it really does leave the practice of what that looks like up to the practitioner. Because the way that we teach it, it's not about what it looks like, but it's more about what it feels like. So we might suggest and offer different movements and shapes to take, but at the end of the day, it is up to the practitioner to move in the way that feels best for their bodies. So they get to decide whether or not they want to do it, if they want to maybe take a different shape, or maybe their practice of yoga is sitting in stillness and doing nothing at all. And all of that is correct, because it is the practitioner that gets to decide that.
Thank you. That's really helpful clarification. I think for many of us who might have done a yoga practice of some kind with a sort of more Western emphasis on the body and using it as a form of exercise. So it's helpful to reorient the thinking towards what does it feel like, which of course is the true meaning of what yoga is about the centering and stillness for meditation. So that's incredibly helpful. And I'm wondering how that practice, whatever it looks like, whether it's the sitting and being restful or doing something else, how that completes the cycle, the trauma response cycle. And if you could talk a little bit more about that trauma response cycle and why that's important to complete.
It is so important. And I'm glad we're going back to that, because I think it's really, really important to understand. So when there's a threat, whether it's real or perceived, our nervous system disorganizes from what it was already doing, and it organizes in a way to get us to safety, which means it'll either go into fight or flight. And so all of this energy goes into our extremities. If we need to run, the energy will be mostly in our legs. If we need to fight, it'll be mostly in our upper body, right? And so imagine what happens when we do that. If you're going to run or you're going to fight, all of this energy is built up here. We feel the tension, right? Our muscles are toned up, our breathing speeds up, our heart rate speeds, like everything is happening internally to help us accomplish that, to help us get to safety, to run or to fight. If this energy doesn't complete, if it doesn't have anywhere to go, then it stays stuck and trapped. And so really what we're doing, and so like think of it as like literally like frozen, like I'm thinking of like an ice cube or something. It's like frozen, it's stuck. And what we're needing to do is get this energy to move. And the thing is that our nervous system is not that picky either. It just needs to move. This energy just needs to not stay stuck. So just because maybe my natural instinct is to fight, doesn't necessarily mean that I need to like punch somebody, but it might mean that I need to release this energy that's in my hands or my arms, right? And that can look like anything. I mean, I just shook it out, but I could swing my arms, or I can do some sun breaths, reaching up and then down, right? So it can really look like anything. And then same thing with the legs, just needs to move that energy out. So we can do that in lunges, warrior poses, literally just walking around the room can be really helpful. Because again, all we're looking to do is to discharge this energy so it doesn't stay stuck and trapped. What's not helpful to do when we have this energy is to just sit and do nothing, right? The sitting and doing nothing is great once it's discharged, right? It helps us to integrate that experience. Did that make sense? Was that helpful?
I think that that's really helpful, and really I encourage anybody who has a question about this or wants to know anything more about something particular, please let us know in the chat if you have a question for me to ask Julie, and then we'll open it up in a few minutes to people to unmute themselves and ask directly. It's a really great explanation, as Sophia said. It's a very helpful, I think, to think of discharging the trauma and that trauma response cycle in that way, because I think that we really have sort of a cultural bias towards thinking that trauma is about just feelings, or at worst character, like that you should be, if you're tough, you can withstand a trauma, right? And if we think about it more as like a biological and physiological process, a cycle that has to be completed, that seems like a really helpful way to reframe that trauma response. And I'm thinking, given that a lot of our work is around children in schools and children's mental health, we often see kids doing the same kinds of movements that you just did, right? Shaking or walking around when we have told them to sit and just be still, right? So I'm wondering if you could maybe tease out a little bit about how this can apply to kids, or kids who have experienced trauma, or within the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just said it too. It's like we're seeing that they're doing it already. So now let's do it on purpose, right? I work with I've worked with a lot of kids too, especially in classrooms. And something that I found that was really, really helpful is before we ask them to sit, we do a little bit of like mindful movement or just like free form movement, just kind of like get the wiggles out. And so just encouraging them to move that energy, really listen to the body, like what do they want to do? Maybe let's shake for a minute, let's like take a few breaths or whatever it is, and then they're more likely to sit, right, and sit in stillness. So yeah, I think it really is just about like reading the room and seeing what's already happening, which is why I also start with like, what does it mean to be trauma informed? It's like really understanding ourselves and our response to like the complex human experience. And once we can do that, we can have more compassion and kindness towards ourselves, because our body is doing what it was designed to do. And we activate to meet a threat, and then we deactivate once we get to safety. But if we don't ever perceive that sense of safety, we stay activated.
Well, I really liked the way that you reframed the trauma informed as people informed, and this idea of reading the room, what's actually happening in the room, what is happening right now, right? Rather than thinking backwards or forwards, which often a lot of teachers or parents or just people are trying to do. And Catherine asked in the chat about some suggested methods for allowing kids to release pent-up energy in the classroom. And I'm almost thinking even if it's helpful to do this sort of on a preventive basis, right before you notice that an energy is building in the room. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, especially with kids, so what I love to do is shake. I like to shake it out with them. So we see this in the wild, like our dogs and cats at home are shaking out all the time, and that's them releasing any of this excess stressful energy. So with kids, one of my favorite practices that they seem to enjoy a lot is literally just like shaking it out, like just kind of like wiggling it out. You kind of get a little bit crazy, kind of meet them where they're at, where they're like activated. So maybe a little bit of chaotic movement, and then we can go into more of the slow kind of movement to get them to settle back. So a simple practice would be like, all right, everyone, let's take a moment, pause wherever you are, and then let's shake it out. And shaking out the hands, the legs, right? Noticing the breath. What's happening with the breath? And then you take a big breath in, exhale, let it out. Pause for a moment. And then here we do slow and controlled movements. We inhale, reach your arms up. And exhale, release the arms down. Maybe do that like 5 times. Let them decide the pace that they want to go in, and how high up the arms go. And then maybe end with like 3 conscious, mindful breaths. And they're already down. And so what we did there was a complete cycle. We activated sympathetic, and then we were mindful in that state, and then brought them back down into the present moment with those 3 breaths. Does that make sense?
That is incredibly helpful, I think, to think of it as the cycle, as that wave of activation and then deactivation, which gets to the question that Aditi wrote in the chat about a little bit about the slow pace and the restorative aspect of this approach that you use at Exhale to Inhale.
Yeah. So another way I like to think of it with yoga or trauma is an experience of something that was too much. It happened too fast and it was too soon for me to respond appropriately, right? And my capacity to cope has been overwhelmed. So now with yoga at Exhale to Inhale, we are looking to do it slower and more intentional, more mindful. So our yoga practice is can be challenging. I mean, it really is about what you need from it, but is with the intention to reconnect with ourselves in the moment, and to, again, make decisions based on what I'm needing. And so for that, we need to slow the practice down a bit, and we focus on postures and forms that are very nourishing and supportive. But even our yoga classes are the same way, where we have that cycle where we meet them where they're at, so we can activate them a little, like get them in their body, noticing those sensations, making choices based on that, and then we bring them back down with more slow restorative postures to end the practice, bringing them back into the present moment, now in a more regulated way. Was that helpful?
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And Lily asks, I mean, obviously you've simplified these traumas and sort of traumas. You've simplified these concepts so that they're easy to understand, and the thinking about the neurobiology of trauma is very complex. But the way you've described it is really helpful. And I wonder, thinking about Lily's question, do you have any materials or helpful explanations for how to translate that further for kids to learn about their own nervous systems and nervous system response?
It's a really good question. I'm sure I have resources that I can't think of right now. There is a book, it's a children's book that is like brilliant to just help the kids understand what they're feeling inside. But it really is just about that. It's like when a child is scared or angry or whatever it is, help them understand that like there is something happening inside, and it's that, like what's happening inside, that needs to be addressed, not necessarily like the external stuff, right? So like I'm angry and I'm like holding, you know, my body in this way, so the corrective thing is to soften. But I think it's really, I mean, when I work with kids, I explain to them like, you know what happens and we get scared and we you feel that inside, like your body is preparing you to get to safety. So notice if in that moment, like you want to run away or you want to like punch or, you know, whatever it is, that is happening for a reason. And so just really helping them to understand what is happening inside of them has been really, really helpful. Another thing, because I like to really say, it's like we go from asking the question like, what is wrong with you, instead to like, what happened to you? So helping the kids to understand that like they're not wrong or they're not being bad because they have these feelings inside, but there's a reason why it's here, right? The reason why it's happening.
that's helpful. And I think not only is it helpful for when you're thinking about talking with kids, but I certainly know a lot of us as adults who did not have these tools as kids and did not learn these things, that concept and maybe even that book would be really,
I
really helpful as well. Maybe
yeah,
we can find the title
I'll
and
find
send that
it.
out.
I have it. It's on my shelf here somewhere. So I'll find it and then I'll send it over for
And
sure.
as Lily says, thank you for the language, for putting these concepts into language that's understandable. And you mentioned when in your initial discussion talking about how these trauma responses are normal.
Mhm.
These responses, this cycle of regulation is a normal response. And I think we're sort of conditioned to think like a response to trauma is abnormal, right? It's something to be fixed. And really the point it seems like you're making is that it's when it's not the cycling up and down and the response to the trauma that's abnormal, or those aren't even helpful words, but when the response gets stuck on or off, that's what we have to really pay attention to, which I think is helpful. And especially when we're thinking about framing that for kids. But that brings me to a question about that window of tolerance that you described and how we can expand that window. I think for many of us at this point in the COVID-19 pandemic, and given the traumas of the world and the vicarious trauma that many of us have experienced, it feels like that window is shrinking. Or I'll speak for myself, it feels like my tolerance window is shrinking. So how can we use these principles to make that window bigger?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think a lot of people can relate with that window getting smaller, or it might appear that way. Really, so what happens, we have this window, and when we get to the edge, our job there is to stay present, to stay in the moment so that we can now tolerate this new level, right? And so to put it simply, it's like when you have an experience of discomfort, how can you find comfort there so you stay in that experience, even if it's just a little bit longer before you go into the overactivation, right? Or the underactivation, like the stuck on or the stuck on off. So it's recognizing, I think first and foremost, it's like we need to have that awareness of like, am I at that edge? What does that feel like? But even if you're asking those questions, you're still within that window. Because if you're able to be present with that, like, oh my God, I'm really uncomfortable, I don't feel good, this is too much for me, then you are present, right? You're present with your experience. And so that's what we want to have, are more experiences where we can stay present with this. Now, if you are at that level, let's say it's like level 8, let's just quantify it, and then you were able to stay there, now that's an experience that you didn't have before, that you weren't able to tolerate, that you learned to tolerate, and your window just got bigger, right? So the more experiences we can have like that, the wider this window is going to be. But it's a practice, it's not something that's just going to happen. We have to practice at it. And so I really like to invite people to consider like where can you find comfort, right? If you're in an experience of discomfort, how can you find some comfort there so you can stay in that discomfort a little bit longer?
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left. Does anybody in the audience have questions that they'd like to ask? Because I certainly have a lot of my own, and one of them was about that. Many of us, the trauma that we've experienced is not removed, but is sort of continuous. Could either be at a low level or a high level, but we're not able to escape it. So my question was about, if you cannot remove yourself from that traumatic stimulus, how you manage that. But I think you sort of answered that in the staying present, but I wonder if there's anything else that you'd like to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is about staying present. So changing our reaction to what's happening in the moment, right? And so if, as I'm witnessing all these things happening around me, and I notice that my heart rate starts to speed up and I start to clench, maybe like tighten my shoulders, or I have difficulty breathing, if my work is to find more comfort in this moment, then that's what I need to work on. I need to work on slowing my heart rate down, maybe releasing some of this tension that's in my body and slowing my breath down, or whatever it is that I need to do in that moment. And that's going to help me to stay here longer without going into the trauma response, right? The fight or flight, or even the freeze.
Thank you. And in our last couple of moments, just to put you on the spot, I'm wondering if you can tell us one thing that we could all do today to begin practicing this, sort of a trauma-informed quick practice for self-care.
Sure. Do you want me to lead you through something really quickly?
Sure.
Okay.
If it's quick?
It'll be quick. So take a moment wherever you are, sitting, standing, no matter what it is. If you'd like, if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes or you can keep them open. Find whatever feels best for you. And I invite you to take a moment to just check in with your breath and check in with your body, noticing any sensations or lack of sensation. And if there's any kind of movement or shift that your body's needing or wanting in this moment, I invite you to honor that and move in whatever way your body's needing or wanting in this moment. So that might be some movement in the shoulders, maybe your neck. And then notice what happens to your breath once you do that. You might have noticed a shift, maybe you didn't. And it's really that simple. So I don't know what happened to you, but I just did that, right? And I adjusted my neck and my shoulders. And as soon as I did that, a big breath just came in, right? So my nervous system regulated itself once my body was more in a posture of safety.
Thank you. That is a wonderful way to bring us to the close of this session. Thank you so much. I don't know about everybody else, but I feel a lot better after just a couple of breaths. And I think it's important for people to know it's that simple to begin. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Julie. And thank you to everybody else who joined us this afternoon. And I will pass it to Dana to close us out.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you everyone for joining today's listening session. A reminder that our funding does come from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which requires us to evaluate our services. So please do take the very brief survey that will appear in the chat momentarily and will also be sent to you as a follow-up to today's presentation, along with the slideshow and a link to the archived video. We hope that you make plans to join our upcoming Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative events, including our Family Passionate Conversation about wellness in Latinx families. This one will be conducted in Spanish. It's Wednesday, May 26th at 3 p.m. and you'll get the link to register for that with the slideshow. We have 3 more upcoming sessions in this series on June 23rd about addressing school-related trauma, on July 21st, holistic health, mind, body, and spirit, and on August 18th, community wellness. So please do join us for an intimate conversation about challenges and success around these wellness-related topics. On June 16th, we have a webinar which I will be leading about self-care for all, and we will be practicing some of the trauma-informed things that Julie talked about today, including some breath work, meditation, chair yoga, and also talking about how to weave mindful habits into your daily life. We have one final session of our national MHTTC network, National School Mental Health Best Practice, Always and Now series. So please join us on May 25th for that final closing session. Thank you again for being with us today, and we hope to see you at another of our listening sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.